Welcome back. We're still looking at how to multiply. We're in lesson 2 if you're taking notes. And having said that, if you need notes, write me at pastor@highlandfamily.org and I'll get you all the notes for these series or any other notes you need for any podcast or videos we've done. Again, in Matthew 9:38, where we started last week, Jesus said, "Pray the Lord of the harvest that he will send forth laborers into his harvest." We must have specific intercession regularly for laborers. It isn't suggested. Jesus said here, basically, do it. Jesus used the laborers brought to him, the 12 apostles and others outside that group, even to 500, 1 Corinthians tells us. The ones he chose specifically, these 12, one of them even was a devil. Within them, he developed leaders who would do what he does. He multiplied, cross-trained, apprenticeship, journeyman relationship. Now, there isn't just one doing the work here now. Now it's not just Jesus, but now we have 13 in harmony doing that. Of course, we know about Judas Iscariot and how we get in the book of Acts. There's only 11, and they pick a 12th. But the fact of the matter is 1 into 12 is still multiplication. Not one guy doing it, but 12 now doing it. As I said last time, it all sounds good on paper. When we do the math, we end up with a ton of people in a very short time, all saved and in church and multiplying until the whole world's one. But, as I mentioned before, and I'll mention again, we have the law of free will. Some people will not choose Christ, and even more will not keep going on. And the law of diminishing returns. Less will be returned, the more we invest in it. It's just the nature of the beast. People, in other words, will bail. Some will stay. Few will continue with evangelistic fervor until the end. We're going to have so much admonition in the New Testament about enduring to the end, and a reward will be given to you. And most people, honestly, peak early and then fade out. And I think that would happen to me also if somebody had not come alongside of me and multiplied Jesus into me for me to multiply to others. Now, I mentioned last time, and I hope you have read Acts 20, 17 through 38. If not, go ahead and do so. You need to. The principles mentioned last week and this week and the next few are coming directly from this text. The Apostle Paul is at Ephesus here in this text, where he spent 3 years now. And now they have a growing church, plenty of leadership, multiple elders, it says there, pastors. Here, Paul talks to the church leadership and reminds them of the principles for building a church. 3 principles are involved in this passage that parallel the same 3 principles Jesus used with the 12 apostles. The 3 principles are this. 1, fellowship. That was last week. A dynamic family, as we're covering in today. A family dynamic, rather. And then we're going to get into a modeling example, which will spill us over into other lessons. This week, let's talk about the second one, a family dynamic. Building those relationships mentioned in the first week we did this. You're also going to want to check out 1 Corinthians 4, 15 and 16. That also explains this some. And 1 Thessalonians 2, 7 and 11. Paul had a parent's heart when he discipled people. It wasn't cold and calculating, going through a book or having a series or doing a curriculum. Not that those things are not great tools and resources. As I've said, we're going to cover quite a bit of those for you. But the principles that we're talking about these next few weeks, understanding conceptually multiplication, and in this case, a parent's heart in a family unit. That's how Paul did his discipleship. So, my son Timothy in the faith. He mentions the tightness and closeness with Onesimus and Philemon, even though they were at odds. He talked about Titus being so close to him, and beloved Luke. Paul had a deepening fellowship, like we said last time, a connection, as I'm going to focus this week, a parent's heart in this family dynamic. In so doing, the churches that he planted and or even the leaders I mentioned that he left behind had a family feel about them. So when you read those dynamics and concepts within the letters that he wrote to Ephesus and Philippi and so forth, while many essential functions of leadership, training, and education or whatever must be individual. Some things can be done in the classroom, but a lot of times got to get down the nitty gritty one-on-one with somebody. And even more times, communications within a church had to be private in ministry. Even though that's important, we really focus on it. There's a lot of blogs out there and a lot of books about that because it gets missed, and there's no doubt. But the interpersonal connections with people are tantamount to every other essential thing we do. The interpersonal connections with people. People are the ministry. It's not just about seeing the person at church or at our next group or finding, well, that person wasn't here for 2 weeks, something must be wrong. Man, there's something wrong with your relationship. If you got to wait 2 weeks to figure out they weren't at church, and being at church in some place, it isn't the real answer to relationship. That's what the 20th century, now floating in the 21st century, a problem and makeup has been. Everybody gets really uptight about different forms and functions, but really, it's that there's a loss of relationships and building and deepening those relationships. It was our grandparents' generation, even some of us, our parents' generation, they got together at least once or twice a week, not just church people, but they played card games and talked and had fun and went on trips together. Nowadays, man, it's the opposite of that. It's not about seeing a person at church. That's the bare minimal. But about having a tight-knit connection like brothers and sisters ought to have. Because we are brothers and sisters in Christ. Instead of a lot of that, we have a lot of ministries now that resemble modern families. They're splintered. They're aloof from each other. I think that's the key word there. Is it just kind of aloof? Oh yeah, I love you, but from over there. It can become like the perfunctory dinner that families attend. Like that's just what's expected. Church has to mean more than that. In fact, without this, we're sunk. Without the family feel, there won't be a desire to join, fight for what's right, share with each other, be there for each other, sacrifice. The interlocking of the gifts and ministries of each person in the church with each other that's in the church is essential to the building of a healthy family unit in church. The healthy church life comes from working together and praying together and worshiping together and so on. The word fellowship we saw last session comes from the Greek word koinonia again. It does not mean chicken and singing after a service in the summer. Have a fellowship meal. That's not what it is, but that's what it's turned into. Fellowship, in a biblical sense, that is, means to have a deep-rooted connection, deep-rooted connections in our relationships. In modern terms, best friends. It is an intimate relationship that is cultivated and purposely attended to. Now, how many relationships do you have like that in your church? I've been in some form of leadership ministry or around it for most of my adult life, and I can tell you this. Over the years, the blame for church not being this way, this deepening relationships, is usually landed at the feet of the pastor and his staff. But the Bible says, a man that hath friends must show himself friendly. And there is a friend that sticketh closer than a brother. Proverbs 18:24. 2 points there in that text. If you want friends and want to keep them at a high level, you have to demonstrate friendliness yourself. Instead of, they didn't do that for me. That's selfishness and not a real friend. 2, in that text, Jesus did and does this on the regular. This is who he is. And we are to be like Jesus, a friend that stays closer than a brother. Now, Satan, though, he seeks to isolate. And boy, is he working his game strong today. Satan uses your humanity and excuses to blame others when this doesn't work right. Truly, believers can act like junior high kids with all the drama and such that goes with it, just because they have a fear of rejection and unrequited love. Man, it's on us first. Again, fellowship in a biblical sense means to have deep-rooted connections in our relationships. It is an intimate relationship that is cultivated and purposely attended to. I'm going to amend my phrase, my previous question with this. Are you cultivating relationships like that in your church on purpose? Are you cultivating relationships like that in church on purpose? Let's take one group within churches, spiritual babies. We can have a newborn from new birth experience, brand new saved. We can also have babies that are believers that have been saved for a number of years but never grew up. Both are possible, and both happen in North American churches. Paul's ministry, everywhere he went, involved parenting those newly won to Christ and giving exhortation to those who should be growing. Paul shared a close relationship in this new family of believers, trying to get them to connect on a deeper level with the others in the local church family, much like a parent. Now, a parent has a threefold responsibility in real life, more than that, obviously, but how that parallels to church life. One, loving. So I'm going to be a friend that sticks close to a brother. I'm going to be that guy that's there with that person, even the ditches. I'm going to intentionally build these relationships. Well, 1 John 3:16 says, hereby perceive we the love of God, because he laid down his life for us, we ought to lay down our lives for the brethren. Well, they didn't do that for me. That's not what it says. That's not, they ought to lay down their life for me. Well, yeah, of course they ought to. But you ought to lay down your life for them. It starts with us first. Being a functioning, fellowshipping member of a church means that you sacrificially love those who are in membership with you, naturally and openly and on purpose. While the word love is not mentioned in Acts 20, our text 17 to 38, the idea is embodied, though, in the passage. In verse 20, love is giving, not keeping back anything profitable unto you, Paul said. Loving deeply releases tears as well. If it's really for real, there's going to be some emotion connected to this. And boy, I don't know why Christians, specifically fundamentalists, really push this idea of all emotionalism. Well, God gave you emotions, man. What's wrong with that? Use it for God. Loving deeply does release tears. It does get you in the heart. He used that 3 times in chapter 20, 19, 31, and 37. He used the word tears. Love is giving also. It's not just the tears, and it's not just, love as we want to parallel it to, but keeping nothing back from you means you give. You can also see this in verse 33 and 34. Paul not only worked to support himself, but also his team. And the way he loved people was also to help financially keep them afloat and helping them out and giving them opportunity. He wasn't worried about the separating the boxes like people do today. Well, I have my work box and I work with those people, and then I have my home box and I have my church box. No. The same things he would do anywhere else, he did there with his church people, because they're the ones closest to him. They were a koinonia fellowship. Now, not only a loving and but now also feeding. A parent's heart, Paul's heart for the babies there in Ephesus, and even us today, is feeding. A family has to feed. Verse 20, 27, and 28, Paul never ceased to teach the Bible. He says specifically to give the whole counsel of God. He never ceased. He was a teaching machine. And it is required in all of us who would be in leadership, as Peter said in 1 Peter 5:2, feed the flock of God which is among you. We have to do that. It's not optional. People need to be fed the word. They need to start feeding themselves. They need to be able then to grow up enough where they can feed others also, and there is multiplication. What family doesn't lean in and teach what they stand for and believe about this life? Well, the only one that doesn't do that is an unhealthy one. If I'm in a car or truck ride with my kids, we see something, I point it out, they point it out, we talk about what's right, what's wrong about it, how we need to be as people, what it means to be a Christ follower in this culture, in the real day, in the real life. They come and talk about their work experiences and their school experiences and what's going on, and we talk about what the Bible says about that. That doesn't mean we don't agree with them. It doesn't mean we don't share how frustrating it is, but Jesus said, and we try to encourage them and coach them that way. We're feeding them truth, because that's the only thing that sets you free. Just as parents should, we have to teach the kids what this life is all about from a child up. Or whether they're a 5-year-old kid in church, or they're a 22-year-old kid in church, or they're a 72-year-old kid in church, we have to Apply the Bible to what's going on. Feed the flock. This family needs feeding. If we wait until they're 18, like your kid at home, we would have already lost them and their heart if we wait till 18 to tell them about this life. In the same sense, we must state immediately and then begin immediately the follow-up ministry with this new convert or anybody who has made a new commitment to God or have a spirit of brokenness amongst them, that we need to jump in immediately and follow up with truth and feed them the nourishment they desperately need to be a really functioning member of this family. Now, talking about this family unit and this family parent heart that Paul had, not just loving and feeding, but protecting. Verse 28 through 31 of Acts 20, Paul, as a spiritual parent, both, it says they're warned and disciplined. You should also read like Proverbs 27, 5 and 6, Proverbs 28, 23. It is essential that our family dynamic in church protect each other. Sometimes it is by warning, as I mentioned just now, but also it's by correcting gently. Some people are just too prideful to hear the warnings. They're going to run to that wall no matter what, and they're going to blame everybody else for it. For those, as we would our own children in our families, we must also have a conversation then. If we are in an intimate, deeply connected relationship, why can't we have a conversation about real life? Again, if we're in a deepening fellowship, having a cup of coffee and chatting about our lives, trying to show how Satan's prowling, that should be the normal. It should be expected. We shouldn't walk alone in these things. We should be in this together because, man, everybody's going through it. If these things are really happening in your church, then I got to tell you, you are blessed beyond measure. You really are. In many churches, it's not. This is why it's a privilege and should be an honor to be a member of a church. Otherwise, you have a country club, and that's disastrous. Everybody wants something from it rather than giving something to it. Any church that claims to be Jesus' church has to be in fellowship with each other as a healthy family parallel, or they're really violating the ability to be his church. Now, is your church a healthy, connected family? Pray. Pray and ask God to give you wisdom and strength in this. And then launch out. Start getting in the lives of those whom you should be loving the most and seek their best, not your own. Invite them over for dinner. Connect with them. Randomly text and phone call them as you would your own family members. Now, if you're right now using this as an excuse and saying in your mind, well, I don't even do that for my own family, then that's a lesson for another day. Folks, that's messed up. We need to be connected and connecting more, not less. Hebrews 11 tells us that not just forsaking some of themselves together as a manner of some is, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. We need to ramp this up, not panhead it and not dump it. We need to do it better and more. Now, one last time. Fellowship, in a biblical sense, means to have deep-rooted connections in our relationships. It is an intimate relationship that is cultivated and purposely attended to. Are you purposely cultivating relationships like that in your church? I hope so. Until next time.